Hello, everyone. Welcome to this new webinar and conversation, of Museum Expert. We are so excited to have Omar with us today to address one of the issues that has been so central for us during our years of operation. DEI has, from our perspective, always been front and central in creating a human-centered workplace, and especially over the last years, this has been more and more critical. So we'd like to see where we are going into this area and what the future potentially holds. And no better person, I think, to guide us in that than Omar Eaton-Martínez. Omar is currently serving as the Senior Vice President of the Historic Sites and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. But we invited him today in particular because of the creation of being the host of Museum JEDI, a show podcast where he has conversation at the intersection of museums and social justice. And to help with that conversation, Andrea Harp will be the co-host today, and she has 20 years of experience in social services, youth development, and nonprofit leadership. Currently, she is the Chief of Staff and Director of Impact at the Michigan Science Center, where she drives operational excellence, team empowerment, and strong workplace culture. Uh, the way this is going to happen today is we will have a conversation with Omar. You feel free to put questions to Omar in the chat, and we will, as much as possible, come to these questions at the end of this session, so that your question may be answered. So. This being said, last thing for you to know, this will be recorded and will be available on our website within 2 days or something. So thank you for being here, and let us start. Omar, uh, you can put on your camera so we can see you. Okay, thank you. uh, so Omar, welcome. As I said, you are the creator of Jedi, and I was wondering, what was the need for a Jedi podcast, and so why do you start this? So let's begin there.
Well, thank you, Walter, and the Museum Expert Organization for inviting me to come and speak about these issues. I'm looking forward to be in conversation with you and Andrea. Um, Basically, the reason why I started the Museum Jedi show was to fill content for my dissertation that never kind of happened. So, so I was in a PhD program in American
That's
Studies.
good a reason as anything else.
Well, there's always a weird reason why we do these things. But I was in a program in University of Maryland, College Park, in American Studies, looking at material culture and museum studies, and preparing for my dissertation. After many conversations with my professors and supporters and mentors, you should be writing about justice. You should be writing about leadership. This is what people, associate you with. And so I said, well, let me build some content here. So I thought about creating the Museum Jedi show. So I did the first iteration about 3+ years ago at this point, where I basically had just completed four videos, and looking at different leaders across the country who were doing this type of work. It was also just after the Inclusive Museum Leader book had come out, which was co-edited by the late Cinnamon Catlin Legutko, former executive director of the Illinois State Museum, longtime director of that, I believe is called the Abbey Museum in Maine, that focuses on indigeneity, and also the Dr. Chris Taylor, who was also one of the first people to sort of have a chief inclusion officer position in a cultural institution in Minnesota Historical Society. And so I had them, they were my first show. And so then I kind of just spun it off of that. then, life happens, people get busy, jobs change, kids get older, and I kind of left it alone for a little while. And I decided, I've seen a lot of different folks using the Instagram as a conduit for this, and it seemed easy enough. So I started it back last fall, and I just been, spitting them out, and it's been good. Been getting great content, great leaders on here talking about a multiplicity of issues, not just museum leaders either. Sometimes they're artists, sometimes they're nonprofit leaders of different cultural institutions that aren't necessarily museums, and really digging in to the heart of what it takes to be a leader and to stand on the idea of justice. And the question I usually ask everyone at the end is, what does justice mean to you? And so that sort of ties all of the episodes together.
Good. And so what were some kind of remarks that you heard from people what justice meant to them?
Oh, wow. I think a lot of it is the removal of barriers, right? So that, when you are on the oppressed side of a society, in order for you to navigate that space, just the fact that you have to navigate the space in order to gain access to things that we would all consider common and human, to remove those barriers so there is no navigation necessary. One of the things that I think, one of the graphics that I've used before in different talks and lectures, and I think I did it in my TEDx, was a graphic that shows what it looks like when it's equality, when it's equity, when it's justice. And, equality is everybody sort of standing on the same type of box to kind of look over this fence, look at a baseball game. Equity is sort of acknowledging that everybody wasn't the same size. You give a taller box to a shorter person, that. And then the last one is the removal of the barrier altogether, which is justice. And for me, my work is much more justice focused. Like I know that we use DEAI, DEI, and all the other wonderful ways we reorganize those letters. But for me, I purposely put justice first because justice is the framework, justice is the goal, and justice, I think, is what really is going to create true liberation and access for everyone.
Okay. So you said you started as work for your academic purposes, but then that doesn't seem the case anymore. So what are your expectations now by doing this now?
So the other reason I was interested in this was to potentially grow this into the sort of the podcast that it's becoming, but also with an opportunity or hope that maybe we can take this show on the road and create some sort of video docu-series. The one that I always refer to when people ask me a question like that is High on the Hog in the Netflix series. I'm really a big fan of what that gentleman did with his 2 seasons. He was able to go on location and create these different historical connections of Africa with the diaspora through the transatlantic slave trade. And I would love to do something like that with cultural institutions that focus on justice work and community work so that people can really see the work that museums do and can do. And, just even thinking about what's happening now with all of the different legislations and maybe even some of the executive orders, I think a lot of those things have carried the weight that it has, not just because of what office it comes from, but because we as a field have not done a great job of telling people how we do our work, right? So it's
Mm.
easy for disinformation to then rise to the top. So it's easy for someone to say, hey, well, this exhibition at the Smithsonian is just some leftist political rant that we just turned into an exhibition. But if we actually talk to people about how we painstakingly research these things, that we painstakingly vet these objects, that we painstakingly work with the community to come up with these exhibitions so that we can have these convictions so people can learn from them, then, people saying that wouldn't make any sense at all. But right now it makes perfect sense because people really don't know how we do our work.
The fact that you did not do that promotion or that you consider that there is not a promotion of that work, is that not also one of the reasons that there are barriers? We've mentioned barriers earlier. Are there not barriers that prevent you of doing that?
Certainly, there's barriers. There's barriers of understanding. There are political barriers that usually get tied up with economic barriers. There's a lot of barriers. And I think the way that we overcome barriers, for me, first and foremost, is information sharing, building coalition, and
Yeah.
spending intimate time with one another. That's what we don't do good. And the one thing, I mean, I love technology. I love the fact that the world's advancing and becoming more global. But what it has taken away from is, at least in my opinion, it hasn't been enough of that technology to advance intimate connections that allow me to understand different communities that are different from me better. Like, and I'm not asking to perfectly understand everyone in the sense that I become like your number one advocate for whatever you're doing. But I think that there's a middle ground at the very least where I can at least understand you enough to see your humanity, your humanity. I may not necessarily agree with what you did or what your choice was or how you're approaching this, but I can respect the fact that you were thoughtful enough to be there, in the cases that you were thoughtful enough. And but we don't really even have a ground to stand on in most cases when we talk about these diametrically opposed issues, these culture wars, because we haven't taken the time to do that at all.
So your work with JEDI is ongoing, and uh, can you share with us what are some of the outcomes of the work that you have been doing, and that gives you hope to build that roadshow?
Yes. The episodes have all been super edifying for me as personally and professionally. You know, there's some conversations, I think, one conversation that comes to mind is uplifting some of the work happening in Puerto Rico. That's where my family's from. I still have a lot of family there, and it's particularly around the idea and the history and legacy of Black people on the island, which are also connected to the transatlantic slave trade and the thing that most of us call diaspora. And being able to bring, folks like Juan Pablo Vizcaíno and Glorian Sasha Antonetti, who are just incredible individuals. And I can't find one label for them. But one of the things that we've worked on, and it's also connected to the work at the Trust, is that they have restored a historic barge in Loíza, Puerto Rico, that was used and Loíza is an area where a lot of emancipated Africans went to settle upon freedom in 1873 in Puerto Rico. And Loíza at that time, up until the 80s, was separated by a river. And so people took that barge over to San Juan to work, to do trade, to shop, and these types of things. And so it was always a Black family generationally that operated that space.
Mm.
Juan Pablo is a direct descendant of that family. And so as a result of their work and others who have helped them, they have restored that space and created into a cultural center. And now they have engaged the trust, and the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund has given them support. We at the National Trust, through our Path Forward conference, I believe it was in 2024, we gave them an award for the interpretation of the work that they do. And they've taken this barge and they've created this beautiful space of Black joy and cultural connections to Africa that really center Puerto Rico in ways that people don't always acknowledge. And so they do great work. They're artists, they're activists, they're preservationists. The second topic we looked at was the work that they did together called Hebras y Vejigantes, or Vejigantes y Hebras, and which is the Vejigante is a mask that is used during the ceremonial festivals in Loíza and other spaces that are connected to the traditions of Africa and the Moors in Spain. And it's been known as there's a lot of mask making, so it's a craft and art in Puerto Rico. So they took that cultural element and they married it to ebadas, which are poems, and Sasha is a poet and a lyricist, and they meshed that in together to a beautiful video, and they got accepted at the Outwin, which is a huge portraiture competition at the National Portrait Gallery of the Smithsonian. And they're probably the first Black Puerto Ricans ever to be acknowledged in that space.
Okay.
And so we've been able to talk. So in other words, being able to lift up these stories and to show that people are not just complex in their identity, but they're nuanced at what they deliver. I mean, nobody's one person. I'm not just a preservationist. I lecture. I'm a museum person. I'm this. I'm that. All these things are part of our complex personhood, whether they're personal things or professional.
So, what's the big story that you want to tell next?
The big story I want to tell next. I think I want to continue to make connections to other nonprofit cultural institutions. I gained a lot from the conversation I had with Mazi Mustafa, who is the founding director of Words Beats and Life, which is a hip hop academy based out of DC. He's in a lot of different things with cultural institutions, including the Smithsonian. I used to serve on his board many moons ago. So I love also connecting with those types of works, which are nonprofits and cultural institutions that don't necessarily have a building or have collections, but work with institutions that do because they bring an expertise, they bring an audience, they bring a new perspective that really allows these institutions to synergistically create a beautiful space for new audiences to come to and thrive.
Yeah. We definitely need to recognize that there is expertise with many people, that we're not the only one. You know, that's that's for sure. So let me go to Andrea now. Andrea, first, before addressing maybe larger questions, what is this presentation here by Omar inspired you so far?
Oh man, so many things. I think first and foremost, just as a Black woman, it's just incredible to hear just the um this is an industry where there are not a lot of folks that look like us that are doing incredible work across the country. And you mentioned storytelling, you mentioned a lot of times people not being able to see the work. And that I think is true for those of us, many of those who work in the industry, not always knowing before this webinar, I didn't know about your work, and now I do, and I'm excited to learn more about how I can support it and what's happening in your neck of the woods. So I think that that's the most inspiring thing for me for sure thus far.
That's
So then,
wonderful. I love that.
oh, sorry.
No, I just wanted to thank you for that. That's helpful to know, and hopefully we can build on that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah, I
Andrea,
think. Oh, go ahead,
please go
Juan.
ahead.
Yeah, there's one question that's really burning for me. So, as you know, I mean, maybe in the last 5 or so years, right, there were so many trends where many organizations, including museums, nonprofit sector, and for-profit sector, really did a lot of quote unquote work to place or create positions that were more focused on JEDI or DEIA work, depending on how you see the acronym, right? And I'm curious to know if you find or have found in your work and what you're hearing from others across the country, whether you find those positions still effective. And I asked the question because I think many people felt like it was performative or felt like um, folks in those roles oftentimes don't have a lot of power. And I will also add, we've also seen within maybe current administration and different things happening in legislation, a lot of those roles and folks in those roles have been displaced. So I'd love to know your thoughts on if you find those roles effective, and if so, what does that look like in practice?
Mm. Well, I think that there has been this work. In order for me to answer this question, I have to frame that this work is iterative. It takes a long time. It's a marathon. It's not going to happen in 2 years. It's not going to happen in 3 years. I think a lot of that movement, as you stated, Andrea, started happening, maybe right before the pandemic and right after George Floyd, all those things. And then for it to sort of be not supported in a very public way more recently in the last year, I don't really think gives a chance for a longitudinal assessment, if you ask me. I think that they are all the concerns that you brought up are real. Are these positions performative? Do they have resources? If they're not the CEO, do they have direct reporting status to the CEO? Do they have staff to support their work? And I think one of the biggest things that people have not really dug into is how do the boards and the governing bodies of these organizations been able to change because of these jobs being in here and these inclusion plans. So prior to coming to the National Trust, I was part of the inaugural cohort of Facing Change Fellows that the American Alliance of Museums had supported from 2019 to roughly the end of 2022. And, it got mired because of the pandemic, in terms of what we originally had planned to do. But it was something that was really cutting edge for an association that size to dig into. The president and CEO at the time, Laura Lott, had really worked well with folks like Dr. Janetta Besh Cole, who's, I consider to be a museum mother and a giant in the field. And they were able to then take some reports that we did together. I was part of the Facing Change report. There was a working group that existed before the initiative was established and funded. And then they took the other report they did with the trustees, and they sort of used those two reports to then go after money to get, I think, close to $4.5 million of support from Ford, Walton, and Mellon Foundations, if I remember correctly. And so all that, to say is that when people signed up for these types of initiatives, it was new for organizations of this ilk. And I think, if I'm being very honest with you, not everybody knew what they were signing up for. And so if you don't know exactly what you're signing up for, but you think it looks good, right? It looks good that we're doing this, then you're going to compromise the amount of impact you're going to have with an initiative like that. And I think some of us felt that. We were all assigned communities of learning. There were 5 geographic museum communities of learning. And I think if you ask, and there were two fellows per community, so there were 10 of us in total. And I think depending on which fellow you talk to, we all had within our community at least 2 or 3 institutions that we're working with. You'll get a different story because, again, all these institutions are snowflakes. Everyone has a different set of competencies that you're entering with them in, and it's just different. So I think all in all, there was some good awareness that happened for the sites that were willing and prepared, but for the sites that weren't as prepared and really weren't completely sure of what they signed up for, I think you didn't see as much movement. But I think the positive thing is that there's a lot to learn from those lessons for another iteration of this or a revamped iteration of this to be much, much better, much more efficient, and much more coalition based. I think that AAM had done a great job of anticipating um, the power structure in the sense that they had to engage the CEO, they had to engage the chair. But I think, maybe in hindsight, at least from my perspective, it may have taken more than that, right? It may have taken more than just signatures on the paper. Maybe there would have been an interview. Maybe there would have been um, some time spent with the institution before we understood their capacity to really participate in an initiative that would have made a significant change.
Thank you.
Andrea, do you have follow-up questions?
Sure.
Go
I
please.
just want
Yeah,
to
no.
make sure I don't want
Yeah,
to
yeah, yeah.
interrupt or interject.
No, no, no,
Um,
no. Please go
oh,
ahead.
all right. So Omar, one of the things you've talked about and touched on is barriers. And I think you know, in the work that I've experienced, right, barriers exist sometimes for the communities that we serve in museums, but there are also barriers that exist for employees of museums within this work. So I'd love to hear your perspective on some examples of what those barriers are, and even a follow-up question already. what are some practical ways that museums might be able to address them?
I think the most important barriers are structural. And so, in order for you to deal with a structural barrier, you have to be able to have the will and the ability to examine that and be honest about what's happening in your institution to make that change. It cannot happen just because you think it should happen. It takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of time, and there's no one answer for for this, right? It just depends on what your institution is doing, what capacity they have, what will that they have. When we did that fellowship, we had them do an assessment, and we were all trained and certified on this assessment. And what I would say that was good about the assessment, because no assessments are perfect, right? But I think what was good about the assessment, if anything, there's any one thing, it was the idea that however progressive you think you are way more progressive than you actually are. Like, and I think, the research that assessment organization had done, who had been doing it for decades at that point, had said at least, I think I want to say the numbers like 83% of organizations that go through assessment fall into that category, right? Most people think like that they're way more, not necessarily way more, but like there's enough distance enough between how they think progressively versus how they're actually seen by other people, right? And so that means the opportunity is that dissonance, right? There's a delta there for you to address. That's fine, right? I think you have to understand and identify that there's a delta, acknowledge it, and have the will to address it. That's good, right? I think what happens is people see that delta and then they get in their feelings about it, uh, issues and emotions that are rooted in fragility pop up. And then very little progressive things happen as a result when people are acting in their fragility mode. And fragility can exist through race, it can exist through religion, it can exist through gender, right? It can exist through all those intersections, right? So it's not just white fragility, it's all these fragilities. And so we have to be mindful of those types of things in order for us to move forward. I think when we did this, you know, I'll use this one example, and I love the institution. I got to work with the International Museum of Muslim Culture, right? This is an activist institution, right? It was my only culturally specific museum that I had to work with in that context, technically. And they're based out of Jackson, Mississippi, right? And started by an African American woman and a Middle Eastern man, right? So already the ideas of race and gender around, what the processes of Islam are already exploded, right? You already have that. So then, the idea was, well, they only have people who are followers of Islam on their board. What does that mean for you? What does that mean for diversifying your board or being inclusive? And so we went through exercises of that. And again, they're very progressive minded. They understood that they might think they're more progressive than they were. There wasn't a whole lot of problems. There's some questions that we worked through, but we got through it and they were great and fantastic and engaged. And then the ultimate thing, what we decided together as a collective was, instead of trying to convince them they needed to add like Christians or Jews or atheists on their board, was to understand the beautiful diversity within the Muslim community in the United States and beyond, and to really dig into that. I mean, and they already had a great start with their two founders being an African American woman and a Middle Eastern man. And so that's what we did. And we were able to increase the diversity of their board and create an inclusion plan with that thought. So again, that's just a great example of like, how do we take this concept, we work with it in coalition with the organization, and then we create a result that's perfect for them. Not some cookie cutter thing. That's what everybody always wants. Everybody wants to ask Omar, well, how do you do this? And A, B, and C, man. There's no how-to book here. The how-to book is your will. Are you willing, right? Are you willing to give up of yourself? Are you willing to stand in the gap? Are you willing to share power? That's the how-to. I don't have a book for you.
Yeah. So maybe just bouncing back on that. The first step is to show your willingness to act upon these issues, and then the next practical step. What is that? Inside of a museum, if you have a museum who wants to take on these issues in a more effective way and say, we're willing to do it, we want to work with our staff, how do we practically start doing that?
Yeah. Yeah. It's I think for my experiences in that fellowship and other work that I've done, it's really about the will to share power without creating a space where those who are already in power feel like their power is being taken. Like
Mm.
the power is not yours, the power is the community's, right? And I think we're just used to certain groups being in power that represent dominant culture, and we acquiesce to that because we're socialized to acquiesce to that, and we don't have to, and they don't have to, right? Because they're also acquiescing to it, also, right? So I think the idea is, and I got this idea from from somebody I think is really, really, really smart about this, uh, and he said that inclusion is additive, it's not reductive,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
So that like if you're talking, and that was really in the context of structural parity on the board, adding people on the board who represent different perspectives, rather than that means if I add, let me just use the cliche, another Black person on your board, that means I am getting rid of a white person. That is so not the case. It doesn't have to be that way. Now, if you choose to do that, that's on your own. But like, that's not what we're saying here. We're saying you have control over your bylaws as a board. I served on boards, I chaired on boards. I know about this bylaw thing. You have the will to change your bylaws to add people so that you can have this structural parity, this balance, then you should exercise that will. Nobody's telling, there's no law telling you you can't do that, at least not yet. So, so that's something for people to think about.
Some person in the audience asked, do you know examples of museums who have shared power?
We're shared power.
Mhm.
Well, there are certainly organizations that are looking at shared power. And I'm careful to give examples again for because of what I said earlier, but something that's worth looking into is sort of the exercise of what happened at the James Madison's Montpelier, where it's James Madison is obviously a presidential site, the father of the Constitution, but his family was also a slave-holding family, and so there's been a lot of work being done over many, many years to cultivate relationships with the descendants of the enslaved from that space and other descendants of enslaved people who just live in Orange County and Orange, Virginia. And as a result, we did achieve what we call structural parity. But I still think that there's a lot of work to be done because the structural parity concept for the person who asked really was based off of the Interpreting Slavery with Descendant Communities rubric, which was created in 2018 through the Teaching Summit on Slavery, that was actually coincidentally, but not so much coincidentally, hosted by James Madison Montpelier, and it's funded by the National Trust African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. I took place in that summit as an employee of the Smithsonian. And the results of that summit were the creation of the rubric, and one of the components of the rubric is structural parity. But structural parity doesn't stop at a governance. It also, if you read that rubric, continues on into staff
Mhm.
and audience, right? So we've gotten so stuck about the governance part, we forgot to dig deeper on the staff and the audience as well. And so once we get to that, then I would say if James Madison's Montpelier achieved all of that, I'll be like that they're the model. Or if you want this model, I don't think we should do models, but like if you wanted something to look at seriously as quote unquote successful, I would say that. But right now they have dealt with and it took a lot for the structural period of governance, but they're still dealing with staff and audience, right? And many other sites who have done that are the same.
I have two questions that relate directly to the executive orders that you mentioned earlier. So obviously we know all what that meant, and that was a real uh, embargo on DEI programs in museums by from philosophically and also by cutting money. Uh, and the two aspects of that for me is the two questions that I have to you is uh, many museums have said that they continue to work in other means with other means. Do you have any examples of good examples of museums have done DEI work with other means? And the second question of that is, and you mentioned it earlier, how to your museum relate to the community where they are established in if there is this difficult uh, work and the new practices that you need to build in to continue the EI work. Is that really something that the community has understood?
So, Walter, when you say other means, you mean other resources outside of federal funds? Is that what you mean?
No, I mean other practices, other ways of programming with other names or doing the same DEI work,
Oh, I
but
see what you're saying. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
Mm.
I don't know. I don't know how helpful I can be with that one. To be honest with you, at the
Okay,
trust,
no, that's
I mean, but I would just say this, at the trust, I would say that, we haven't changed names for programs. In I would say at least 90% of what we did, maybe a little bit less. I mean, there's one program I think we had to change the name that had to do with an internship, but in terms of like the work and the programs that we offer at the sites, we haven't changed any names that I'm aware of. And quite frankly, when it comes to culturally specific sites, there's no choice. Like, again, I mentioned my board work with the Association of African American Museums. What are we supposed to do?
mm,
We can't change our name. This is who we are, right?
yeah,
This is who we are. There's no dancing around this.
yeah,
There's no alternative name for this. Like we just got to do it, right? And I think that's why I really try to when I talk to people about this work, I try to kind of create some separation from institutional building, culturally specific things, and well, some people call DAI work and JEDI work. I don't think those things are the same. I
mm,
think DAI work, particularly, is something that really actually privileges dominant culture because we're focusing on how can we survive and navigate dominant culture instead of deconstructing it and building something more equitable, which I believe is justice centered. And so that's why I lean into justice rather than just DEAI. And I think culturally specific things are really people who are exercising self-determination. The Association of African American Museums will be 50 years old in 2028. And we've existed as a volunteer organization for most of that time. We just recently, 6 years ago, have a salaried president and CEO. And so we still are supporting all the Black museums across the country through the work that we do. So these types of things just have to kind of be disaggregated in a way so they can really answer it in a way that's productive and true.
yeah. Andrea?
Yeah, I'm over here taking all kinds of notes. Okay, so can you I, I am familiar with the work of deconstruction, and that just struck a chord for me. Can you talk a little bit more for people who are unfamiliar with what that means? Because I know we're talking structural, right? We're talking about no longer preserving systems that oppress and depress and create barriers, and sort of having to posture ourselves in a way that continues to preserve those. Can you talk about more specifically help people understand what deconstruction looks like, please?
So um, there are different scales, of course.
Mhm.
I would say one way to deconstruct is to push back on the dominant culture's definition of a thing, right? Great example at the National Trust. We have tended to, during most of our 75 years, maybe not recent years, but most of our 75 years, to privilege structures that have a connection to white male wealth, right? And we have connected all of the different rubric and standards based off of that profile, right? So then when we come up with this, and these are things that I've learned in the last 4 years, people, so bear with me. But like the idea of a vernacular thing, um, not too long ago was we don't do vernacular. We don't do ordinary house or structure, right? It has to be associated with something magnificent, from white wealth to some famous architect to some famous style to this to that, the other. But in order for us to tell the full American story, the National Trust has understood over the years that in order for us to do that, we have to let go and expand that. That's deconstructing a rubric in that way, right? And then the great realization that there's a couple examples of, the work um, that Elon Cook Lee is doing. So I know that she's here because she's typing up stuff in the chat. So I'll call you out, Elon. She's done some great work around bringing our sites of enslavement together, a site shaped by slavery together, in a way to center the voices of the enslaved using the rubric that we help support to create and to activate it in a way where each site can do that with the capacity in mind. So every site's not coming into this at the same level. Elon has learned that lesson, right? So she's had to adjust and differentiate, but still support at the end of the day the work that they're doing. And so that's a deconstruction of how we interpret sites so that we're not centering the enslaving family or the person of wealth, that they're all part of this larger narrative. We are all part of this larger narrative. The other thing, as an example, that comes out the trust is obviously the success of the African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund, right? Because there's a lot of things. I mean, certainly they support things that are architecturally significant, like they're conserving Black modernism, but they also supported things like the Nina Simone Childhood House, right? Because that's a stories that are being told at their childhood home. And if you see it, and if you've ever been there, you've seen pictures of it, you'll see that it's not like some great David or Jay design, right? It's a very humble space. But in that humility exists greatness. And great it exists resilience exists. We are interpreting resistance. We're interpreting resilience in the name of Americana, right? Because we're all part of this fabric that we call America, and that is part of it. And so as a result, we're able to deconstruct the idea of the magnificent white wealth and to really tell these stories to the vernacular to allow other stories to be told that are just as important as the ones we've been telling.
Follow up to that. So many of the things that you talked about, right, are not, especially if this is something you're new to, it's not easy work. Can you talk a little bit about, and you use the word resistance. So I want to flip it for a second. Like, we are in this moment in time in a moment of resistance, strong pushback to everything you just talked about, everything that deconstruction is rooted in. So can you talk a little bit about sort of weathering the storm? What does this look like to in a moment of resistance to all of the things that you just mentioned, stand 10 toes down and push forward?
It's, for me, the critical, essential question that we all have to ask ourselves, that I always love to give credit to my good friend Richard Josie for presenting this to me, which is a question that says or asks, what kind of ancestor will you be?
Oof.
Like, we have to start there, right? Because, man, I don't know about y'all, but I don't do this work. I don't do this work for no reason. If I didn't think that this work wasn't impactful, if I didn't think that my children and my children's children would be benefiting from this work, I'd find something else, right? And so when I think about that question, I think about, well, the critical question for me is, what kind of ancestor will you be, and how do I stand up against these things that I know are limiting, I know are isolationist, and I know lead to racism, all kinds of discrimination, and ultimately, and at the risk of getting a little bit too gloomy, I mean, genocide. I mean, these things happen, right? I mean, if you go to genocide, if you read any genocidal studies scholars work, and I would like to call out the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum because they really piqued my interest in learning more about genocidal studies, and I spoke at the Institute of Mass Atrocities Prevention, Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention a few years ago, and that also opened me up. The idea is that once you start to erase people, you see them less than human. Once you see them less than humans, it's all downhill after that. It's all downhill, right? And of course, the example that they use historically is what happened to the Jewish community in the World War II era and all those things, right? So, but obviously, there's a lot of other people, unfortunately, on this earth who are also being seen as othered and being treated horribly and being erased at the same time. And so then these new generations come up and they don't know about you, they don't see you as human. And so that when you're out here crying out for your humanity, there's no context for them to even understand what you're talking about. You might as well be speaking Amharic. You might as well be speaking Martian. Like they don't understand what you're saying because they don't see you as human. And as long as this work allows us to inform that, you got me till kingdom come.
Thank you.
So, Omar, I'm going to the chat, and I see there's a question there that I wanted to bring up here, and it's a little bit long, but I'm going to read the question. It says, Omar, do you have any thoughts about the way that JEDI or DEIA has been thrown around without deeply unpacking what they mean? I'm particularly aware of people feeling like they don't understand the language and feeling alienated from it simply because they don't understand. When are we using jargon versus speaking in ways that are accessible to the majority of the American public?
I'm grateful for that question. I'm very grateful for that question. I do think we get caught up in the jargon a little bit too much. I think we have to do a better job defining and creating context and nuance between things like DEAI and JEDI. But I also think the best way to do that are things that are actionable, right? I mean, we can write, we can have these wonderful webinars that we're having right now, but we have to put these things in action programmatically in our community engagement. We have to think about the work that we do, like, again, going back to the work that we do with the descendants of the enslaved at our sites, that making sure that we are working with them and building out programs. We're working with them and considering policies. I have one of our sites in Leesburg, Oatlands, who has worked diligently with the descendants of the enslaved community to come up with a proper ethical policy around having special events at a site of enslavement, right? That's been a big issue for a long time. That's another thing that our great colleague Elon Cookley has led over the years, like to help people understand like that this takes time. Like and what I'm saying to you really is that it also doesn't mean that, oh, this is horrible. We just have a zero tolerance policy for it no matter what. That's not necessarily what the descendants are telling us, if I'm being honest with you. Some people might be shocked to know that. Like some of them actually feel like that there is a space for that, but it's a very slim space, and we have to work with them to be able to define that for the public for it to make sense. And I know that even defining this and making that effort is already going to rub people the wrong way because it cuts against the grain. But that's what we have to do when you stand in the gap. That's what you have to do when you disrupt hierarchy, especially ones hierarchies that aren't equitable. What I always say, people, and this is a great saying, is that like, you're doing something when the dominant culture feels like equity is oppression, right? That's a marker for everybody to pay attention to, no matter which side of that coin you feel that you're on.
Thank you. So, Andrea, do you have a last question maybe on your side?
Sorry, my husband is deciding he wants to vacuum right now and does not realize that I'm doing this. I will forgive him later. But my last question, Omar, is just if there is one thing that you want to leave with people today, you've talked about a lot. What is that one thing?
Mm. Um, Justice is love work. You have to love people. You have to love humanity. You have to love what you do. Love comes with respect. Love comes with honor. Um, Love comes with sacrifice. I don't hide to too many people or anybody that I can think of that, I'm a man of faith. And I believe that, the love that my Savior has taught me is rooted in what they call agape love, which is actionable and sacrificial. And you can't achieve justice without loving at that level.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I was going to Catherine to see if I have missed some questions in the chat that we can ask Omar.
We do. We have a couple. Let me just scroll up. So there was a question early on with the acknowledgement that this process is more like a marathon, and there's never really an end to the marathon. What does a museum that has embraced principles relating to DEI and justice look like to you?
I think what it would look like is um, you would have a governance that um, was representative of the audiences and stories that you are telling. You would have a staff that's representative of the audiences and stories you are telling. You would have job descriptions that um, include the great diversity of your scope of work. Sometimes we create these job descriptions, and then you get these jobs, and you find out there's like 200 other things that you're doing, and you're overlapping with other things. And I think that that's also a legacy of traditional rigidity around how we look at jobs and people. I think that you would be able to have you would be able to communicate with great clarity the value your institution has on your community. There wouldn't be no second guessing. You would understand exactly not how just how your community saw you, but how they value you and what opportunities you have to grow those.
Thank you so much. Uh, I think that these are just a very good way to actually end this conversation because it really gives some kind of a framework for future action for museums, and I think that's a fantastic way to end. Omar, thank you so much for sharing all your insight and your experience over time with these issues. I wish the best to JEDI, and I hope that you make the roadshow. And if we can help in a way or another, let us know. These are topics that we are really sincerely strictly want to happen. And so, we're there in the future if you need us. So
I appreciate that.
thanks, Andrea, for giving some context to us and helping us in this conversation. I really appreciate your help there. Catherine, as always, in behind the scenes there and doing the work and make this happen, and the whole museum expert team, and as well as the audience as well. I really appreciate you being there for listening to this. And I wish you all the best for the weekend and the future of the EI in museums. Thank you.